Patrons of the Bloomsbury Theatre, please welcome to the stage your chosen comedian for this evening, Ivo Graham! Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out to see my show. It is an absolute pleasure to be doing this. Thank you, one person, for really emphasising it. It's a pleasure for you as well. I love doing stand-up comedy. In October 2020, I did a Freshers' Week comedy gig on Zoom. I'll say that again so the bleakness of it can really fill the auditorium. I did a Freshers' Week comedy gig on Zoom. Pity the freshers of 2020. A tough year to be any age, I think, but particularly to be 18, not getting to finish school with any proper parties or music festivals or holidays. Your exam results jeopardised by the government, and you finally get to university, and it's essentially a full-price prison camp. And yet, to stare into the gallery view of the St Andrews University Freshers' Week Zoom comedy night, it still felt pretty loud and clear like I was the worst bit of the whole thing as far as they were concerned. And I know that because most of them looked quite bored and confused in front of their laptops, and one of them had really voted with his feet by spending the entirety of my 20-minute set on the other side of his kitchen, visibly cooking a risotto. You can't help but take that as something of a slap in the face. Made me feel embarrassed, made me feel old as well, still a relative youthful 31 years old, but never had I felt further removed from the tedious maturity of Gen Z than watching an 18-year-old rustling up a risotto in supposedly the craziest week of his life so far. I'm aware Freshers' Week 2020 had less going for it than previous years, but nonetheless, you're sending a pretty strong message to the rest of the intake when you're crushing your cloves on night 2 on Zoom. While I begged a child to rush his dinner for me. The dignity of the enterprise, saying increasingly desperate things like, couldn't you just pour all the stock in at once? To which he replied, but then it won't cream. Fair play. Another knife to my heart, but undeniably strong cooking advice. I haven't known most of you very long, but I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I would hate for any of your risottos to go uncreamed on my time. I would describe that still as only the second most stressful video conference of my pandemic. The most stressful was in April 2021 when I took part in a podcast that was being live streamed on the internet while staying at the DoubleTree by Hilton Hotel in Hull. And I made the mistake of revealing on the live stream podcast that I was at the time staying at the DoubleTree by Hilton Hotel in Hull, causing some very amusing viewers of the live stream podcast to call my room immediately at the DoubleTree by Hilton Hotel in Hull, and in one extremely creative piece of banter, to send bananas and yogurt to my room at the DoubleTree by Hilton Hotel in Hull via an Asda home delivery. I had an only semi-exaggerated and extremely potassium-heavy breakdown and very little sleep before the following morning I was due to interview local football hero Dean Windass about his mental health on a pedalo boat for the first episode of a travel show which has not been recommissioned by the Dave Channel. So those are a couple of high points from the last few years of my life. And a lot of the story I'm going to tell you tonight is set in 2020, 2021. It's not meant to be a sort of COVID or a pandemic show, but inevitably it is in and amongst it. I got COVID in January 2022, not a very historically interesting time to get it. And also I was lucky for 2 reasons. Number 1, that my symptoms were mild, and number 2, that I got to isolate at home during the first week of the Worldle puzzle craze. So I struggle to describe it as an entirely bad time in my life. If you don't know what the Worldle puzzle is, by the way, congratulations on your busy and fulfilled years. I don't know what you were doing with your time, but it was a lot more interesting than the rest of us trying to guess different 5-letter words on the internet every single day for no reason at all. Bored nerds dying alone. Just a few of my guesses from this morning. Structurally, that works okay as a joke, but as a Worldle strategy, it is all over the shop. I enjoyed doing the Worldle puzzle in my isolation, and then continued to do so after my isolation. In March of last year, I got caught doing the Worldle puzzle in a nightclub. Not a hugely strong moment, but obviously you'll understand if you know that the new Worldle goes live at midnight. So if you are up past midnight, that box-fresh new Worldle's going to be burning a hole in your pocket, let me tell you. It was Worldle on the dance floor. The cover version that Sophie Ellis-Bextor refuses to clear, no matter how many alternative lyrics are sent to her management. Gotta fill those goddamn vowels right in. It scans. Don't you tell me it doesn't scan. I do enjoy going out on the town with my friends. It's just that most of my Friday and Saturday nights are spent driving around the country doing stand-up comedy. So I am still partying. I'm just partying on my own, in my car, listening to Radio 1. Listening to Radio 1 and their curious mélange of throbbing drum and bass with some of the most tedious texts ever committed to iMessage. People texting into Radio 1 on a Friday night to say that they're not able to go out tonight, but all of these banging tunes are making them wish that they could. What a pathetic community of people that is. Shame on you if you're amongst that number. Annie Mac doesn't care about your coursework. She pretends to care and then she plays an even more banging tune. Is that compassion? Not in my dictionary. Don't get me wrong, I've felt the same, just never felt the urge to get in touch. Never gonna text in and say, "Oh, Pete Tong, I'm meant to be going to the Cardiff Glee Club tonight, but if these beats get any sicker, I'm just gonna pull into memory services and do a line off the dashboard." I like to imagine Classic FM having the opposite problem. People texting into Classic FM on a Friday night saying they're meant to be going out with the boys tonight, but all of this lit Vivaldi's making them want to sack it off. If this sonata slaps any harder, they're going to cancel the Uber and start on a coq au vin. My favourite part of every Friday night is a tweet that I receive from my favourite Twitter account telling me that it's now the weekend. The Twitter account is called Ladies and Gentlemen, The Weekend, and its sole existence is to announce the weekend every Friday night. And the account has over 500,000 followers. The internet is a fascinating place. If you don't know it, perhaps you'd understand more if I told you that the weekend was being announced by none other than Daniel Craig. 007 himself. I don't believe he recorded this content specifically for this purpose. A couple of years ago, while promoting No Time to Die, he was hosting the American variety show Saturday Night Live, where one of his contractual obligations as the host was to introduce a pop star whose stage name is The Weeknd. A couple of you are already fast-forwarding to the fun in your own minds, and I can't say I blame you. Daniel comes out and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, The Weeknd," as any of us would have done in the circumstances. Some legend in their bedroom sees the window of opportunity of a lifetime, clips it up, pops it online, 500,000 disciples gather to worship every week, myself included. I am yet to have a Friday night too good or too shit not to be vastly improved by Daniel telling me it's about to be a different day. He's perfect for the role as well. He's a glamorous international celebrity, but he's got some thank fuck it's Friday energy to him these days. Hope that's not too controversial a thing to say that Daniel Craig looks tired. Who wouldn't look tired on the never-ending promotional trail for the multi-delayed post-COVID release of a James Bond film he didn't even want to be in? Where he wasn't even allowed to bang anyone because it's not those times anymore. Poor old tired Daniel. Running around with a stitch and falling in love and dying like the cuck Bond we all voted for. Fry another yay, his sad eyes seem to say every single week. I was, ladies and gentlemen, the weekending it pretty hard on a stag do shortly after the end of Lockdown 3. Now, because all of the people involved have been trapped indoors for so long, and this was most of our first party, I don't need to tell you that the energy on the Stag Do WhatsApp group in the days and weeks leading up to it had been, even by Stag Do WhatsApp group standards, deliciously toxic throughout. Pint emojis flying back and forth. The single pint emoji and its cheeky cousin, the double clanking pint emoji, all president correct. The best man wanted to make sure that we were all at full double clank energy at the start of the stag do, so he got us all to sit down and he delivered quite the keynote speech. He just looked over us all and he said, "Lockdown is over, the boys are back in town." Feel the shiver down your collective spine at that. Lockdown is over, the boys are back in town. We were at a go-karting centre in West London at 9 a.m. I would say an insufficiently laddie environment for such epic levels of bro-on-bro chat. Who are the boys, I hear you ask? 9 management consultants and 1 stand-up comedian? Between the ages of 27 and 42. Waiting to be briefed about the rules of go-karting, alongside 3 other groups of carters, all of the rest of whom were children. What did they make of us? What did the 9-year-old's birthday party make of the phrase, "the boys are back in town"? Did I see one of them downing his fruit shoot extra fast as a tribute to our majesty? Go-karting instructors have a tiny bit of authority for 20 minutes of their week, and they relish every second of that authority. He was insistent that we wouldn't be able to handle the course. This was the expression to which he returned time and time again. At one point, he got right up in my friend's face and he said, "Are you sure you'll be able to handle the course?" And my friend replied, "Yes, I drove here today in my adult car." The instructor didn't like this at all. He referred to this as cheeky back chat. What a delicious phrase. He was keen to steer us away from the cheeky back chat. At one point he said that if we broke too many rules during the race, that we would have to be pulled over for re-education. What needlessly sinister phrasing that is. Pulled over for re-education, especially to quite a posh bunch of boys. Our education cost enough the first time around, thank you very much. Can't call up Ma and Da, telling them they've got to dip into the pension because I've burnt too many oranges at team sport karting. At one point, he said that if we didn't pay more attention in the briefing, he would have to cancel the post-race medal ceremony. And we looked back at him, adults and children alike, as if to say, that is not as big a threat as you think it is, I'm afraid. If you go round to a guy's house and he's got go-karting medals hanging from his bedroom wall, get out of that house as quickly as you possibly can. Not having a pop at go-karting, I should say. It's obviously a vital part of the stag do smorgasbord. I've got a lot of respect for anyone who organises anything like a stag do or a hen do. It's a lot of admin, it's a lot of pressure. I couldn't handle it myself. I know that because I had to do it about 5 years ago for my friend Ed, and it was not a success. And Ed's request was simple. He wanted to go canal boating on his local canal. I booked the boat. We arrived at the dock in the morning to discover that the boat had a max capacity of 12, and we were a party of 13. And my punishment for being the chief architect of this baker's dozen snafu was that I was the twat who had to spend the entirety of the 2 hours walking along the towpath next to the canal, trying to join in with the nautical banter from the humiliating safety of dry land. Any of you ever shouted, "I me hearties" from a cycle path? It's a low point when you know in your soul you're not one of the hearties. Later that day, I'd organised a trip to a beer factory where, due to another admin error, we had enough time to tour the factory, but not enough time to drink any beer at the end of it. I quite literally failed to organise a piss-up in a brewery. That's why I'm not even usually on the stag committee. Obviously, a lot of admin does go into these things. There'd been a lot of admin gone into this stag do after the lockdown. The best man revealed at one point during the day that he'd printed off masks of the groom's face for us all to wear. What a twist this was. We all to wear masks of Andy's face. There we all were, nodding at each other, going, look at us, we've transformed into an even more homogenous group of white men than we were before. We're the biggest legends in this gastropub. Even Andy had to wear one. He wasn't delighted by this turn of events, wearing a mask of his own face on his stag do. At one point he said, but I'm already me. What an existential crisis to have to grapple with on your big day. Also, he wore his mask most of the afternoon. He had a lot to drink. At one point, he stumbled into the pub toilet to be sick. He returned to tell a story of how he'd gone in, lifted up his happy, fresh-faced start-of-day mask to reveal the blotchy hell underneath it, hurled disgustingly into the bowl, And then Dorian Grayed himself straight back into his own stag do. The rest of us, we took off the masks almost immediately, because they were quite hot and quite cumbersome. Took off the masks, regained our original identities, finished our shandies, off to the archery range. We must stick to the schedule. I thought about this again a few months later. Following January, I was isolating at home with COVID and Worldle. I decided in my isolation, while sorting out my stuff, that I was going to throw away my mask for my friend Andy's face from the stag do, because it was taking up too much space in my feelings box. I'm sure I don't need to explain the concept of a feelings box to any of you. It's a box in my home into which I throw anything of any nostalgic potential whatsoever. I love the past. I love to think about it constantly, obsessively, borderline self-harmingly. You can't change it, but boy, you can think about it. The future, much more intimidating and unknowable. No thank you. The past, great. The future, bad. The present, fine. Main attribute, proximity to the past. The best seats in the house. So in they go, into the feelings box, all the old tickets and photographs and receipts and trinkets, but obviously stuff does get thrown occasionally. The mask, it was too big, and also it didn't pass the other test, the hoarder's ultimate delusion, reuse potential. I am clinging on to some real shit in my life in the desperate hope I might get to use it again at some point in the future, and I'll feel clever. I'll save a tiny bit of money, I'll connect momentarily with my past, and I'll feel that a narrative arc has been satisfied. My miscellaneous cream sponge bag in my bathroom is the most curious museum to every ailment I've ever had, and a strange desire for those ailments to return. I got genuinely sad a few months ago when I threw away a tube of the hemorrhoid cream Anusol because it had passed its sell-by date. 5 years ago I had hemorrhoids, the rumours are true, I dealt with the situation swiftly and efficiently using Anusol. Other anal creams are available, I'm not being sponsored by Anusol, but that is the marketing that I seek and crave. Spent the following 5 years almost hoping, in a weird way, for more piles later down the line, just so I could achieve that life goal of seeing out the soul. I don't think that works quite as well with a mask of your friend's face from a stag do. Even if my friend were to remarry and there was another stag do and there were more mask-based jolly japes, I think it would be considered bad stag vibes as the masks came out for me to reach into my own bag and go, oh no, still got mine from 2021 actually. Some of us still remember Louise. I enjoyed going through my stuff while isolating last year, but it was nothing compared to March 2020. In March 2020, I returned to Nostalgia HQ, my parents' house in Wiltshire. My parents' house, brackets, nicer than my house, brackets, might be mine eventually, brackets, TBC. A lot of variables still in play. Brother and sister yet to really show their hand long term. I was lucky that I was able to go and spend the first lockdown at my parents' house. I was even luckier that my parents weren't there. They were trapped on the other side of the world by the pandemic. I love my parents very dearly, but there's no better combination at any age or stage of your life than parents' house without parents there. All of the aga, none of the aggro. Let's keep it simple. I spent 5 months during the lockdown at my parents' house. 5 months sleeping in my childhood bedroom. 5 months, the longest period I've spent in that bedroom since my parents sent me away to an all-boys boarding school when I was 7 years old in 1998. I don't blame them. It was a good decision. I was a little shit. I was asking too many questions. Questions no parent is prepared to answer. How are babies made? What happens after we die? Why does Home Alone 3 have a different child? Too many questions. Let somebody else explain Macaulay's problems to the boy. I wrote a lot of short stories at boarding school in the late 1990s, and of course, I've brought a few of them with me tonight. They paint quite the portrait of my mental state at the time. There are 3 unifying themes to these stories. Number 1, a strong undercurrent of loneliness. Number 2, a transparently autobiographical main character with my name changed to someone from the Thomas the Tank Engine franchise. Number 3, the stories almost immediately pivot away from their originally stated or requested aim to be about whatever was happening in the real world of football at the time. So we start, by way of example, with a windy night, 1998. Gordon was asleep in his bed. And he heard a thunderstorm outside. The wind was loud, and the rain rattled against the windows. He felt so alone, and he missed his mummy and daddy. But then he had a great idea. He could watch Match of the Day. So he went downstairs and turned on the TV. There were no pundits because of Des Lynam's views on the Good Friday Agreement. Even now, when we're filming this, let alone at whatever point in the future people may watch it, we're already quite far past the sell-by date for the Des Lynam's views on the Good Friday Agreement. But once you've written that, that stays in the show till the end of the tour. It was 1-1 in Man U v Newcastle. Man U couldn't lose if they wanted to win the league. With 1 minute left, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer tackled Rob Lee to stop him scoring. He didn't get the ball and he got sent off, but it was just what he had to do and the match ended as a draw. Just then there was a flash of lightning outside and the TV went off, so Gordon went back to bed and fell asleep. The end. And you can't help but sympathise with my teacher, who's written underneath, Ivo, this is not about a windy night. I was not alone for the first lockdown. I should say I travelled west to Wiltshire with my own young family. I've got a daughter, she's 4, she was 1 when we went into the lockdown. I dare say that's maths many of you could have done in your own minds. Our daughter is ageing in direct proportion to linear time, and we're extremely proud. I was very lucky to get all of that time at home with her. I was meant to be away for a lot of that period with work, and instead I was at home every day with my daughter at this very sweet age and stage of her development. Her mum and I were both self-employed, so we could organise what little work we had around essentially watching our daughter learn to walk and talk in the sunshine in my parents' garden. It was a good time. I'm not going to go on about that too much, because obviously lockdown was very stressful, and there'll be parents in the room who had older children or more than one child or had to homeschool while working from home. I was friends with a few of those parents during the lockdown, and I learned very quickly they didn't want to hear about our picnics. Those awkward moments where I had to put down girl, woman, other for 10 seconds because my daughter had crawled out from under the parasol. I loved it. I loved being at home with my daughter, in my own childhood home as well. My own childhood toys. The hoarder's ultimate fantasy. The next generation crossover event. Watching her stare blankly at a bop it she'll never understand. She'll never have to understand. She'll never be bored enough to bop. That's been the whole of the last few years as well, having my daughter as a constant source of delight and distraction throughout all of these stressful times, watching her grow up in this strange new world, the new normal, basically just her normal. We went into a shop together a couple of years ago. I wasn't wearing a mask, and she said, "Daddy mask." I thought, that's quite cool. She already gets the whole mask thing. So I popped on my mask of Andy's face, straight into the shop. She barely knows who her father is by this point. I should say I'm not trying to boast about her development. That same day, she did also lick a bus stop, so hard to tell exactly which of the signs she's following. Hard to look at your 2-year-old licking a bus stop in the middle of a pandemic and think, well, she hasn't been following all of the daily briefings. Don't get me wrong, the messaging has been inconsistent, but there is a fairly implicit link between us wearing these masks and us resisting our human and primal urge to lick every bus stop we can get our filthy tongues on. Don't get me wrong, I was first down the depot on Freedom Day, but you've got to wait. I enjoyed the family time during the first lockdown a great deal, but I should say, lest it become too smug, it was a complex time as well, because my daughter's mum and I were not actually together. We broke up in 2019 when our daughter was just a few months old, in what certain members of our extended families referred to, with delicious British understatement, as not ideal timing. And they were well within their rights to understate to that extent and beyond. Obviously now, we can look back and laugh, as we know just how not ideal the timing was still yet to become, as on the other side of the world, in Wuhan, an enterprising local gourmand tucked into their back ciabatta. And the very concept of distance and space became complicated for everybody indefinitely. I don't want to go on about it too much, obviously. It's not meant to be an awkward show or a breakup show, or certainly not a My Ex show. There is one My Ex punchline later on. I think it's important that I warn you about that and warn you what it is. The punchline is quite literally, and I must stress, separate categories. So there you go, forewarned. It was stressful, of course, at the time, 2019. Like any breakup, it was my first breakup. You'd have to say, an ambitious debut. But containing all of the ingredients as we know them and love them. A few tears, a bit of soul-searching, quick Edinburgh Comedy Award nomination, bang! Straight into the pandemic, no messing about. Probably worth adding for context as well that we were together for several years. We both wanted to be parents. We love being parents. We still consider ourselves a family unit for our daughter. We live near each other. Our daughter goes back and forth. We still do a lot of stuff together. But we also had a lot of stresses and strains in our relationship that we weren't always very good at working through. And so after one too many difficult conversations, we wondered whether we could be better as a family unit for our daughter without having all of those stresses of being a couple. And obviously it's still pretty early doors, but I think we're pretty proud of the decision we made and how we're doing. Now that's quite a long and tedious summary of the situation, and I do know that because apparently it exceeds the character count for a Tinder bio. They are sticklers for brevity over at Tinder. Had to shorten it down to just single dad soz, but I think the nuance is still there. We broke up, we moved apart for a few months, then we moved back in together to co-parent from separate bedrooms under the same roof for 5 months of a global pandemic in what you'd have to call a real Guardian long read of a situation. And then in 2021, we went to Peppa Pig World together twice. With our daughter, obviously, the main motivating factor behind that decision. Not just the one part of the relationship we couldn't bear to leave behind. The biennial childless trips to PPW must remain. Our daughter loves Peppa Pig, so as soon as we discovered there was a Peppa Pig World in Hampshire, just a couple of hours' drive away, it became inevitable that we'd be going there as soon as the third lockdown ended. We went, our daughter loved it, she talked about it all summer, we went again a few months later, then immediately started talking about whether we'd go a third time, at which point I did start to think, this is probably going to be stand-up comedy at some point. Very cynical, of course, but you've got to talk about what you know, and what I know is Peppa Pig World. That's my life now. And I thought that'd be quite good, actually. I can make it a nice little structural part of the show. I can keep going back and back to it, just like we went back and back to Peppa Pig World. It'll be a fun prism through which to discuss the delicate dynamics of the modern parenting arrangement. Yeah, I was getting excited about that. Then, unfortunately, all of that was ruined in October 2021 when I turned on the television to see our dearly beloved former Prime Minister Boris Johnson doing some pretty scintillating stand-up comedy about going to Peppa Pig World himself, taking the topic off the table for the rest of the posh twats. I was livid! If you didn't see it, do check it out in your own time. A masterful piece of oratory, as we came to expect from the man. He came out, he said, has anyone been to Peppa Pig World? Then he started doing observational material about the characters, about how Daddy Pig is a slightly shit paternal role model. Bold approach from Boris Johnson, but a good observation regardless. I sat there watching it, watching my own material disappearing up in flames, thinking, well, I can't talk about it now. If I talk about Peppa Pig World, people will just think about Boris Johnson. That's the last thing I want. I was sat there thinking, fuck you, Boris, actually. If that's not too much. Fuck you, Boris, you selfish, greedy... Which is weird, because I think otherwise he did an absolutely superb job. I don't know if you were following the big calls, but it was right as far as I'm concerned. I don't think that. I think the previous thing that I said... It's a delicate ambiguity to try and navigate when you did literally go to the same school as the man. Which I did, I'm afraid. I went to Eton for 5 years as a teenager. I've mentioned that in every stand-up comedy show I've ever done, because as my father always says, just got to own these things. It's actually advice from a separate conversation about land, but the point stand, the portfolio-based approach from Dad. So here I am now as an adult, trying to pop my head above the parapet of left-wing political comedy, but not quite so far that you can see my bow tie. That's the situation as it stands. It's hard, obviously. It's a conflict, you know. Whatever you believe, it's always there in your background. Last July, Boris Johnson's cabinet started to crumble. Everyone started resigning. That was pretty exciting. I was straight onto Twitter, pumping out anti-establishment tweets as fast as I could possibly type them. But I was also, to be fair, texting Tristram and Hugo about how our old captain of games had to stand down as vice chair of Conservative Youth. And how I wish that not every single word of that sentence was true, and I didn't have to add the further clarification, captain of games, brackets, Michaelmas. Ah, yes, the Michaelmas term, the autumn term. Our housemaster, he liked to spread out the captain of games jobs on a turn-by-turn basis to stop any one individual captain from getting too big for their boots. You see, for an incredibly elitist institution, we're actually very democratic. If you're already in it, that's how it works. Pull up the drawbridge, shuffle the deck. That's the school motto, in Latin. It was exciting, though. When all of the Johnson cabinet started resigning, felt like the whole world was on social media. The politicians were tweeting, the journalists were tweeting, the comedians were tweeting. KFC tweeted the Conservative Party directly. Always a powerful moment in your national discourse when the Colonel enters the chat. Just when it looked like Johnson simply had to resign, but still refused to do so, someone at KFC thought, it's time. And they tweeted a picture of Boris Johnson's head photoshopped onto a chicken. I was intrigued by this, and all the more so when I scrolled up to see this was actually a reply to a tweet that the Conservatives had sent to KFC in December 2019. On the eve of the 2019 general election, the Conservative Party official Twitter account had published a picture of Jeremy Corbyn's head on a chicken with the caption, "Dear KFC, we found the most spineless chicken there is." And 2.5 years later, KFC replied, "You've got to be upstanding for some motherfucking Kentucky Fried Long game right there." The social media manager of KFC sat in the job for 2.5 years, watching and waiting for their moment. I think it's fair enough to have a quick pop at the government after the last few years, but I don't really think that's my job. I can't claim to have been as affected by their actions as a lot of other people, I'm sure. There's one particular action I'd like to complain about, and I found out about that in April 2021, just as the third lockdown started to ease, and a glint of optimism started to creep back into the nation. I received a chilling email from none other than Team Sport Karting. That's right, friends, I'm on the mailing list. The email began, "It is with a heavy heart," and I thought, oh dear, I'm going to have to read the rest of this email. I had a relatively busy day ahead of me, but I will always carve out time in the schedule to learn what has beheavied the heart of Team Sport Karting. The email continued, "It's with a heavy heart that we will not be reopening tomorrow as planned, because in a last-minute decision this morning, the government have declassified go-karting as a sport." What an email. And whatever your feelings otherwise, what a government. Often incompetent, often evil, rarely boring. No other government in the world was declassifying go-karting as a sport in the middle of the pandemic. The granular legislation to which these maverick fucks will turn their hand in times of crisis. As we all know now, they were getting lashed every single night of the week, and yet in amongst the parties, they were still arguing amongst themselves about how go-karting should be classified. Johnson slumped in a chair, trousers round his ankles, getting ambushed by cake after cake, as he bellows at a coked-up Michael Gove about how it's the cart that does most of the work, really. He respects Lewis Hamilton as a businessman, but not as a sportsman. That's his position. That is the final word. I've tried to distance myself from my school and my background in certain ways as an adult, but I'd have to admit most of the steps I've taken have been pretty inconsequential so far. I'll give you an example. Last year, I decided I was going to stop eating saurine malt loaves. Not an easy thing to do. I'm a lover of the loaf, but I'm sure I'm not alone in this room. Then I read a very persuasive article about consumer ethics by a journalist I follow called Arabella, about how she, also a lover of the loaf, had decided to renounce saurine since learning that they were big Conservative Party donors, and she couldn't enjoy her favourite malt loaves, knowing that they were propping up a regime that she hated. I thought, fair enough, Arabella. Where you go, I will surely follow. It is probably important to add for context that I do know Arabella because our schools went on a joint ski trip together in 2005. A ski trip that Arabella and I, we did not enjoy. We were the outcasts of the ski trip. Is there a tinier violin in the land than the one being played for the outcasts of the ski trip, left out of the action, describing the antics in the chalet in her words as depraved, and in my words, irresponsible, with GCSEs just 17 weeks away. Let's not get our rocks off before we get our box off. A decade and a half later, I'm tracking her progress as a journalist, running away from her privilege as fast as I hope to run away from mine, and if she can give up saurine, so can I. Of course, I will continue to eat the malt loaves that are home cooked for me by friends of my parents who donate to the Conservative Party directly. I'm not going to make a scene in somebody's home. But I'm walking past it in the supermarket. I'm walking past the Serene, and I'm walking past the Sabra hummus. That's not easy either. I loved Sabra hummus. Then I learned somewhere that Sabra are apparently quite directly linked to violence in the Middle East. I read that and I thought, fine! Sainsbury's hummus isn't as creamy, but it'll have to do. And if your life involves that sentence, you've got to conclude that you've still got a pretty nice life. Again, these principles are not comprehensive. In March of last year, I went to watch Newcastle United playing at home. Hey, Ivo, aren't Newcastle United now fairly directly linked to violence in the Middle East? Yes, but a friend of mine's a Newcastle fan and he said it'd be a fun boys' weekend, and it was. Obviously, I cut a strange figure at St James's Park, watching Newcastle United, eating my Sainsbury's hummus, thinking, I'm sending some pretty mixed messages to the Middle East right now. I think it's important to check your privilege where possible in life, but I also think it's important to be grateful for the opportunities you've received and the people who gave you those opportunities. My parents sent me away to an all-boys boarding school when I was 7 years old, but they thought that was the right decision, and who's to say whether that was a good decision or a bad decision? Space adventure. 1999. Percy was shooting to space in his rocket. He was beginning to feel dizzy. He didn't know if he would like space, and he missed his family. He wanted to be at home watching the FA Cup final. Would Man U be able to win it after the exciting win against Arsenal in the semi? Ryan Giggs scored the winning goal, and his tummy was so hairy that he took his shirt off. Percy couldn't take off his shirt because of his heavy spacesuit and the dangerous atmosphere. He felt lonely, but this was his job. He needed to concentrate on space. The end. To which my teacher has written, Ivo, I think it is you that needs to concentrate on space. This story is about football again. Also, I don't think... What a note this is to receive from a teacher, by the way. I don't think Ryan Giggs took his shirt off because his chest was so hairy. Who's to say? Who's to say? I didn't enjoy the second trip to Peppa Pig World as much as the first. Why? A series of reasons. I'll run you through these in a quick list. You decide what would have stressed you out the most. It was a lot more crowded the second time around. Much bigger queues. We couldn't go on a lot of our daughter's favourite, and to be fair, my favourite rides from the first time around. Our daughter not really old enough to understand this. She'd see a ride that she remembered and get excited, and we'd see the queue and have to say, not this time, and she'd get upset. It was much hotter as well. We hadn't prepared adequately for that. We hadn't brought enough water. Kept running out of water halfway through quite a long queue, and then do you abandon your place in the queue to go and get more water, or do you stay in the queue getting thirstier? My ex had recently started seeing someone else. We hadn't brought enough sun cream. There was loads of stuff going on. You decide what would have been the biggest bee in your bonnet. The lack of Factor 50 or the looming spectre of Dan. Who wasn't there, I should say, but he was, by this point, putting in a pretty strong application for a part in Peppa Pig World 3. This time it's definitely not personal. Again, none of this is meant to be uncomfortable or embittered. He's a lovely man. He works in customer experience. As the previous customer, I wasn't hugely enjoying the experience, but this is the life we've chosen for ourselves. And the following week, we met, actually. We went for a pint. We went for a pint to discuss our increasing overlap in each other's lives and how mature and respectful we wanted to be about that. And I don't mind telling you, that's a pretty adult moment in your life, actually, discussing step-parental boundaries over Heineken Zeros with the new guy in town. You can't help but catch a glimpse of yourself in the pub mirror and think, ha, we're not at V Festival anymore, my boy. This isn't very I Go by Toyota sponsors T4. But of course, I've had the same opportunities myself. I've been able to go on dates, especially since the end of the lockdowns. And that's undeniably intriguing, especially as I was in a long-term relationship for most of my 20s. And before then, Just an incel, really. So this is all pretty novel. And I must stress, a happy-go-lucky, late noughties proto-incel before the term got such a bad name. Keeping myself to myself, working hard at school, trying to stay on top of my spots, listening to Muse, all of your classic incel gear. I'm so nostalgic for the past, I can somehow still sort of idealise the two-dimensional incel existence as a simpler and happier time. Much easier to have spots and adult emotional responsibilities. I could do with some more spots. Mainly because I've still got half a tube of Clearasil from 2011 that I've simply got to see out. But of course, it's also exciting doing it in one's 30s, a little bit more life experience. Also, the romantic arena now, much more restaurant-based. That's my scene. In my early 20s, more of a nightclub-based affair. Don't get me wrong, I love nightclubs. It's where I do my best puzzling. But as a place to meet and approach. Now, restaurants. That's my scene. I am dog shit in Tiger, but I run the game in Franco Manca. I'm a superb dinner party guest. I've been told that ever since I was a young boy. Admittedly, by the adult friends of my parents that I was staying up late to try and impress. But guess who I'm going out with now? Adults. It's probably not the sentence you want taken out of context from the show. Also, I think a little can go a long way. If you'll forgive a quick boast, I was referred to as suave on a date a few months ago. Here's what I'd done to earn what I would consider to be the pretty top-tier compliment of suave. I'd booked a table for dinner, and as we neared the end of dinner, I revealed to the person in question that if they wanted the evening to continue, I'd already provisionally booked a table at a cocktail bar just over the road from the restaurant. She said, wow, you've already booked the next place. That's pretty suave. I didn't want to throw it back in her face and go, yeah, if by suave you mean basic admin, then sure, Captain Suave's in town. I took about a minute out of my afternoon to identify and assess 2 adjacent locations. Just a little trick I've retained from my days in the Queen's Cavalry. Something to set me apart from the rest of the shit munchers bashing their way through the yellow pages with their non-opposable thumbs. The same person said I was a nice person to go on a date with because I ask a lot of questions. She said, it's nice that you ask questions. I said, what? Inadvertently playing further into her hands. She said, oh, it's just that the last person I went on a date with didn't ask any questions. Just talked about himself the whole time. I wanted to meet this guy, thank him for making me look good by comparison, but also urge him to read the literally one article I've ever read about going on a date. The question thing comes up really high. I'm the most self-absorbed man I know. I can still work out that lobbing out the odd question here and there is still going to ultimately benefit Project Me. Tell me about your brothers and sisters, and then I'll tell you about my go-karting medals. There was one thing we got to do at Peppa Pig World the second time that we didn't get to do the first time. We got to meet Peppa and George. Even if you've never seen it, you'll know Peppa and George. Peppa, the eponymous Peppa, the pig with human characteristics, age 4, maybe 5. George, maybe 2 years old, basically an imbecile, also a pig. Their faces and the faces of their friends and family, they're all over Peppa Pig World. But like any good money-spinning theme park, there's one particular point in the day where you can queue up to meet the main 2 adult humans in Peppa and George costumes. This hadn't been there the first time around, or at least we hadn't seen it. The second time there it was, the queue, not that long, we got in the queue, we were getting further forward, we were getting excited. And then we rounded the corner, and I saw, to my horror, get ready for this, Peppa and George were the same height. You fucking what? The older sister, younger brother dynamic is key to the charm of the show. The show's been replicated perfectly everywhere else, and now here, at the most narratively important point in the day, they're the same height? This is slapdash and shit, I thought to myself. I looked at my 2-year-old daughter. She didn't appear to be thinking this is slapdash and shit. She was still pretty excited. I had to conclude that maybe I was getting stressed out because of other stuff going on in my life at the time. Or possibly even that I'd misjudged the heights of the pigs because, full disclosure, the previous day, I'd done acid on a beach in Cornwall. Like a lot of people trying to bounce back from the lockdowns, and perhaps particularly in my situation, I'm trying to live a lot of different lives with very short gaps in between those lives. I'd had a very happy, very safe day, gently hallucinating on a beach with some friends. There was one slightly humiliating point in the day where I had to be escorted off the beach by a soberer friend because I was apparently denying that the tide was coming in. I had, in the grip of the trip, briefly become a tide denier. some video footage I'm keen to suppress of my friend Tom bundling me into the back of a taxi as I accuse him of sucking on the sweet teat of Big Tide. When I made it back to the Airbnb, had a pint of orange juice, went to bed, got up early the next morning, made it to Peppa Pig World on time. But I couldn't rule out that I might still have traces of hallucinogens about my system, and the last things you want to be hanging out with when you've got traces of hallucinogens in your system are 6-foot talking pigs and your ex. And I must stress, separate categories. Now, we get to the front of the queue. We have our photo taken. And as we're having our photo taken, the adult human in the George costume leans into me and he says, "What a lovely family." And it's all I can do not to spin around and go, "Fuck you, George, you can't talk." And I don't mean in a take a look at your own family kind of way. I mean literally, you can't talk. You can say the word dinosaur, emit the sound of a dinosaur, and that's it. Stay in your lane, child swine. But I didn't say any of that, because I had to go to Petro Pony's photo kiosk to have the photos printed. Went over, paid for the photographs, at which point, astonishingly, I was informed that due to a technology error, they were neither able to print the photographs nor issue me with a refund. You sort of want one or the other, surely. But neither? Neither? But I didn't make a scene. I stood in a kiosk on a hot and emotionally complex day at Peppa Pig World, and I accepted my fate, and I returned to my young family with neither photographs nor refund, and we drove home, and I don't need to tell you, I spent a lot of the following morning writing a series of increasingly agitated emails to Peppa Pig World, trying to, and I quote, "get hold of anyone more senior than Pedro Pony." I wrote about 4 of these emails until my friend pointed out that perhaps I was putting more effort into trying to save the photographs than I had into trying to save the relationship. And that's quite a difficult verdict to come back from. The mistake. 2019. The Fat Controller made a mistake. And everything changed. Everything might have changed anyway, but regardless of this, it was a bad mistake. The next 4 years would have many of the happiest moments of the Fat Controller's life, but also most of the hardest. Everyone agreed this would all be for the best eventually, but that didn't make it any easier right now. Feelings are a lot harder to control than trains. There was lots about the past the Fat Controller would always regret, but it had also produced the best thing in his present and his future, one thing he would never regret. Something else he didn't regret, though, having more time to enjoy this Premier League title race. Klopp's Liverpool neck and neck with Guardiola's Man City, despite having the Champions League to think about. The Fat Controller watched Liverpool-Barcelona with some friends the week after everything went down. It was nice to have some company in the station house, and what a comeback! How did Barcelona let Liverpool surprise them for that 4th goal? Now that really was a mistake. At the final whistle, Sodor rang out with cheers and laughter, and the Fat Controller forgot his troubles for a while. The end. This was an interesting thing to receive, Ivo. I see the story still become about football. But there are some nice bits here too. I like the line about feelings and trains. And I hope the Fat Controller's doing okay. Sounds like he needs to look forwards in his life rather than backwards. On which note, I haven't been your English teacher for 19 years. Please stop sending me these. I'd like to apologise. I'd like to apologise for the brief endorsement of casual drug use in the previous anecdote. I'm not here to endorse casual drug use, and I've spoken to the people over at Drugs, and they don't want me to either. Not the ambassador they're looking for, apparently. Stick to your creams, roid boy! So with that in mind, here's one final very PG-rated drug anecdote, and by PG-rated, I mean literally, my parents were there. In the summer of 2021, when much of this story is set, my parents, my brother, my sister and I, we were back together as a family for the first time in several months. We went away for the weekend. We were very excited. And my brother and sister and I, we decided to celebrate this by waiting till our parents had gone to bed on the Saturday night and then dividing into thirds and sharing an edible cannabis gummy the size, shape and texture of a Haribo bear. Ladies and gentlemen, the weekend. We were excited to see what mild-mannered adventures might be in store. We thought it'd be a bit of fun. Cannabis, of course, a friend to many of us, I'm sure, especially during those stressful lockdown months. As the saying goes, it helps with your anxieties, unless it doesn't. And that's the roller coaster we love to ride. Here was how this particular evening panned out. 9:30 p.m, parents went to bed. 9:40 p.m, subdivide the bear. Carving it up with a bread knife on the kitchen table, a real ceremony about the thing. 9:45, consume respective thirds of bear. 10:15 p.m, effects of bear start to take hold. 10:30 p.m, my father bursts from his marital bedroom to declare with real glee that mum's fallen asleep, he's had a second wind, and it's time to watch that documentary about the Eagles. Important to know that my father is a massive fan of the American rock band The Eagles. Important also to know that the rest of the family, not so fussed about the American rock band The Eagles, but he's been pushing for this documentary about them all weekend. He says it would be a nice thing to do as a family. The documentary is 3 hours long. We do not agree. We've been pushing back, saying things like, the weather's nice, we could go for a walk, or we could watch the Euros. Or at one point, my sister said, couldn't you just watch it on your own? And my dad replied, not again. And that's the man in 2 words. That's the adversary we're dealing with. We want to indulge our dad. He's a legend. He's a bit of a stressed legend these days, and he enjoys reminiscing about the past, and that's when he's at his sweetest, reminiscing about the music he's enjoyed in his life and the people he's enjoyed it with. But we didn't want to watch this. And then, at 10:30 p.m. on the Saturday night, my father's persistence was rewarded because he'd caught his 3 children in a uniquely vulnerable position. Slumped lethargically on the sofa, baked to fuck like a lockdown sourdough. Far more pliable to his whims than he could possibly have dreamed of, and for reasons he couldn't claim to understand. So it was that we watched 2 hours of this Eagles documentary, and I don't mind telling you, it was one of the greatest nights of my year and maybe my life. I was so invested. We all were. I loved it. My brother loved it. My sister loved it. My dad, well, he knew he was going to love it. He wasn't quite ready for how much his children were going to enjoy it. He was expecting a bit more mid-doc resistance, rather than us snaffling up every detail of the Eagles' backstory like they were tangy cheese Doritos, which, to be fair, we were also snaffling up at a rate of knots. The clues were there. Sat upright on the sofa, non-ironically saying things like, cool, and wow. At one point, my brother asked my dad if he would pause the documentary so we could go to the loo. I have never seen my father smile so wide. A beam normally reserved for ambrosia rice pudding or his investment portfolio. He doesn't want to miss a second of the Hotel California writing and recording process. He's not made of stone, he's made of me. The following day, the siblings were talking about the success of this plan. And I said, what a great night. I said, I love the Eagles. And my brother said, no you don't. You enjoyed the mood-altering chemicals that we consumed prior to the documentary. I said this was very cynical. Couldn't the 2 things be true simultaneously? Unfortunately, he won the argument that evening when we watched the 3rd hour of the documentary sober, and it was shit. You've got to know when to walk away. My father has since seen this show, and we've had a little chat. He'd like to know if that sort of thing was happening again. Not to ban it, not to participate in it, just to know that it was happening. And he also thinks that it's pretty cheap to be having a go at the 3rd hour of the Eagles documentary. Of course, the stuff about the reunion is not as exciting as the first real wave of their success, but it is still a solid hour of rock documentary, and I shouldn't be advising people otherwise. There are my father's footnotes. I hope you enjoyed them. I'd like to thank my family for being such absolute rocks in my life over the last few years. I'd like to thank my daughter for being the best thing in my life, and her mum for making her with me. We're very proud of the girl we're raising and how we're doing it. I'd like to thank all of you for coming to my show. I love doing stand-up comedy. It's the greatest of privileges. I'm having the best time doing it. And finally, I'd like to thank a few friends, amongst whom quite a weird pattern has emerged over the last few years. I lived straight after the breakup with my friends Julian and Rose. Now, if an Eton boy does run into any sort of trouble in his adult life, there is usually an emergency Julian sent along pretty quickly. Steer the ship. Julian and Rose were two of my best friends before this, and my God, are they two of my best friends now. They said, you can live with us as long as you want. They were just down the road from my ex. They said, your daughter can come and stay whenever. And then a couple of months after I moved in, they said, oh, we've got a bit of news. Doesn't need to change anything, but all being well, in about 7 months, we'll be welcoming our first child into the world. 7 months later, I wasn't there. Actually, I was living in my parents' house during the lockdown. But after then, I moved back in with Julian and Rose. They then had another child. I'm actually godfather to that second child. You'd have to say a godfathership of politeness, really. You can only pop out so many lockdown sprogs before you invite your lodger to the church. But as well as that, I lived with my friends Checky and Jamie and my friends Jack and Kaz, both couples, both of whom almost immediately after I moved in announced that they too were expecting a child. Both of those children have since been born, and of all of the things I couldn't have anticipated about the last few years of my life, quite what a fertility treatment I would prove to be in the homes of my friends has been the strangest of them all. I don't want to make light of the struggle to conceive. Obviously, it's one of the hardest things anyone can go through. All I will say is, if you or anyone you know is going through that, I would be delighted to pop into the spare room for a few weeks, just to speed the process along. Who needs IVF when you've got IVO? Everything that's happened in my life has led me to that closing line. Thank you so much for coming to my show, ladies and gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure. Hope to see you all again at some point in the future. Goodbye.
That we've made here, lost the city, our daughters, the petals are distressed. Maybe we should get dressed.